Hey guys, tonight we wander back through centuries, into the dimly lit homes of medieval villages, where the air hangs heavy with smoke, herbs, and a faint hint of baked bread. You trudge across cold stone floors, clutching a flickering candle, every creak of the timber reminding you that this is a world without epidurals, without sterile hospitals, and certainly without modern conveniences. You probably won't survive this if you're squeamish, but don't worry, we're sticking to the ASMR-friendly kind of intense. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time too. I love imagining where everyone is listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward a low wooden bed in a sparsely furnished room, the scent of dried lavender and rosemary mingling with the faint tang of unwashed wool. Expectation thickens the air. Families of the medieval period approach childbirth not merely as a natural process, but as a profound, sometimes mystical event, a liminal threshold between life and death. Pregnant women would often spend weeks preparing, both spiritually and physically. Amulets, charms, and even small pilgrimages to local shrines were common, each meant to secure the favor of saints or protect against the mischievous spirits thought to lurk near birthing mothers. You notice a small bundle of herbs tied with crimson thread hanging near the bed, a talisman against complications. Historians still argue whether such practices had any measurable impact, or whether they were more about comfort and ritual than medicine. The domestic preparations were meticulous. Thick woolen blankets were laid on the bed, clay pots filled with warm water stood ready, and a small stool was placed for laboring positions. Midwives, often older women with decades of experience, would check the mother's pulse, observe her belly's shape, and sometimes whisper cryptic advice about the moon, diet, or certain spells. Interestingly, some households kept tiny birthing kits, wooden boards with rudimentary instruments, dried herbs, and anointing oils. You can almost hear the quiet hum of the house, the children hushed into corners, dogs curled on the hearth, all waiting. Dietary regimens were strict, sometimes involving milk, bread, and pottage, avoiding foods thought to heat the womb or cause difficult labor. Quirky additions included sprinklings of saffron or, in fringe cases, small doses of crushed gemstones, a practice not uncommon among wealthier women. The room itself was a blend of the practical and the spiritual, icons of saints on the walls, a bowl of holy water nearby, and the faint hum of a chant or prayer recited under the mother's breath. You feel the tension and care interwoven, a sense that everyone present is performing both roles of attendant and guardian, mindful that childbirth was as much a social act as a medical one. The anticipation is palpable, almost a tactile presence. You sense the mixture of dread and excitement, the rituals layering comfort on top of uncertainty. Candles flicker, casting dancing shadows on rough-hewn beams while the midwife hums quietly, testing the mother's readiness. The smell of herbal poultices, dried flowers, and the faint metallic tang of iron instruments lingers in the air. Each object, each sound carries meaning. Every stitch of blanket, every whispered word is part of a centuries-old choreography designed to guide both mother and baby safely into the world. And as you settle into this scene, the medieval experience of preparing for labor begins to envelop you fully, a mix of careful observation, superstition, and the universal human desire for life to proceed safely. The midwife enters quietly, her hands smelling faintly of rosemary and linseed oil, and you notice immediately that she commands a presence unlike any other in the room. In medieval times, midwives were both revered and subtly feared. They possessed the practical knowledge to deliver life itself, but also the mysterious, almost mystical skills that could sway fate. You trudge closer, noticing the collection of worn leather pouches at her belt, each stuffed with herbs, tiny scissors, pins, and occasionally small charms. She murmurs a greeting, her voice low and calm, a tonal anchor in the charged atmosphere. You probably won't survive her scrutiny if she decided to test your courage, but there's a strange comfort in her competence. Midwives were often the central figures in childbirth, especially since male physicians typically avoided deliveries, citing propriety, danger, or simply a lack of interest. These women learned through apprenticeship, family lines, or hands-on practice, and their knowledge blended herbal remedies with spiritual guidance. You notice her examining a small clay jar of mashed rue, known to relax uterine muscles, while murmuring prayers over it. Interestingly, some midwives kept secret formulas, passed only to a trusted successor, including potions made from ingredients like fennel, willow bark, or, in fringe cases, powdered pearls believed to strengthen mother and child. Historians still argue whether these concoctions had measurable effects or served primarily as psychological reassurance. Her guidance isn't limited to medicine. She instructs the mother in positioning, often encouraging kneeling or leaning over a sturdy chair, techniques that could help gravity and muscle coordination. She demonstrates with gentle insistence, showing the family where to place hands, how to support the laboring woman, all the while narrating quietly, like a storyteller weaving life and safety into each gesture. Some midwives even included rhythmic songs or chants, designed to focus attention, regulate breathing, and ease the emotional burden of labor. You notice a small, curious talisman of iron hung around the mother's neck, intended to ward off malevolent spirits, a fringe addition that might seem superstitious today but was standard procedure then. Beyond the room, the midwife serves as a social hub. She often mediates family anxieties, calming the mother's spouse or siblings and negotiating disagreements over rituals, diet, or herbal preparations. Some were even called upon to settle disputes about inheritance or morality, blending their medical and social authority in subtle ways. In wealthier households, midwives' influence could rival minor nobility. In villages, they were pillars of the community, known by name and remembered in local folklore. You notice that even the family dog seems attuned to her presence, lying quietly, sensing that a guiding force has entered the room. A quirky, lesser-known aspect of midwives' work was their role in detecting or pretending to detect omens. Some carried small mirrors or crystals to read the future of the child, whispering predictions about temperament, luck, or health. While most modern historians view these practices as folkloric, it's undeniable they shape the emotional landscape of childbirth, giving families hope, anticipation, or even a mild thrill of suspense. Watching her, you feel the blend of competence, ritual, and community responsibility coalesce, an intricate dance that both anchors and protects everyone present. The midwife's world is one where knowledge, intuition, and a touch of theatrics merge seamlessly, creating an atmosphere both practical and almost magical, a lens into the very heart of medieval birth culture. The first subtle twinges ripple through the laboring mother, and you feel the room shift as everyone leans in, attentive to the earliest signs. In medieval times, labor began not with a dramatic hospital alarm but with quiet observation. The tightening of the abdomen, shifts in mood, and sometimes, oddly, dreams interpreted as omens. You trudge closer to the bed, noticing the mother clutching a small cloth to her chest, her brow damp with sweat, the candlelight flickering across the room's rough wooden beams. You probably won't survive the tension in the air if you weren't prepared for the intensity, but that's part of the strange intimacy of this moment. Household reacts with practice calm. Midwives instruct others to fetch warm water, soak rags, and position supportive cushions. Family members, often women experienced in prior births, hover nearby, ready to assist. The onset of labor wasn't just a medical event. It was a choreographed communal experience where each participant had a role. In wealthier homes, servants or attendants might be summoned, while in villages, neighbors could join quietly, offering whispered prayers or small charms. Some households kept pots of hot water on the hearth, ready for hygiene or compresses, while herbs like fennel, pennyroyal, or rue steamed in bowls to ease discomfort. Historians still argue whether such herbal infusions had a tangible effect, or if they worked mainly through suggestion and ritual. Labor positions were practical yet varied. Women leaned over chairs, knelt on mattresses, or even crouched low to the ground, encouraged to listen to their bodies and follow natural instincts. The midwife might massage hips, apply pressure to the lower back, or sprinkle fragrant oils over the abdomen, blending soothing touch with subtle aromatherapy. Quirky remedies occasionally included egg whites applied to the skin or a small piece of raw garlic tucked near the womb, believed to encourage smooth passage. Some sources even mention women being wrapped in layers of linen or placed in warm baths to ease contractions, a primitive, intimate form of hydrotherapy. The atmosphere crackles with anticipation. The room smells faintly of herbs, sweat, and wax from flickering candles. Shadows dance on the walls as the midwife murmurs instructions, her voice calm but urgent, guiding the mother through each contraction. Family members repeat prayers quietly under their breath, some holding charms or small crosses. The presence of a beloved animal curled near the hearth adds a subtle comfort, a reminder of continuity and home life amidst the rawness of labor. In many households, labor was accompanied by storytelling or soft humming, intended to focus attention and reduce fear. Some midwives even used rhythmic tapping or gentle drumming on wooden surfaces, a practice believed to time the contractions. The blend of tactile, auditory, and visual stimuli created a multi-sensory environment designed to support both mother and midwife. You notice the subtle interplay of care, ritual, and observation, each element reinforcing the others in a delicate balance. Even small actions like adjusting blankets, offering sips of herbal tea, or whispering encouragement carry weight, shaping the physical and emotional trajectory of labor. Despite the careful preparations, labor remained unpredictable. Complications were common and outcomes could not be guaranteed. Yet the medieval approach emphasized presence, community support, and the blending of practical skill with spiritual guidance. You witness a living choreography of human resilience, intuition, and centuries of accumulated wisdom, a moment both fragile and fiercely alive. The onset of labor is not merely a beginning. It is a concentrated, shared experience where every sense is engaged and every gesture matters, a tangible prelude to the profound act of birth about to unfold. The waves of contractions grow stronger, and you feel the room tighten around each breath the mother takes. Pain is no longer a whisper but a full-bodied presence, and in medieval times, managing it was as much about ritual and belief as anything resembling medicine. You trudge closer, sensing the tension in the air, and notice the midwife reaching for a small bundle of herbs, lavender to calm the mind, willow bark to ease tension, and a dash of rosemary for luck. You probably won't survive the intensity if you aren't prepared, but there's a strange comfort in the careful orchestration of pain relief. Pain management was a patchwork of practices. Women chewed on willow bark, steeped herbs into teas, or used poultices applied directly to the abdomen. Some sought distraction in chants or songs, while others relied on the presence of supportive family members to soothe and steady them. Fringe remedies could be curious. Small doses of crushed pearls were believed to strengthen both mother and child, while a mixture of egg whites and honey might be spread on the belly to soften the womb. Historians still argue whether such treatments had physiological effects or functioned mainly as psychological comfort. Beyond herbs, spiritual methods were central. Amulets and charms were common, often blessed by a priest or midwife. Families whispered prayers to saints associated with childbirth, and occasionally the mother herself would perform simple rites, tracing symbols over her abdomen or reciting protective incantations. Even a small candle burned in a particular sequence could provide reassurance. You notice the subtle rhythm of these rituals, weaving a delicate layer of emotional support atop the physical demands of labor. The environment itself contributed to relief. Warm water in clay pots allowed compresses or partial baths, while the midwife applied firm but gentle pressure to the mother's back and hips, combining tactile therapy with attentive guidance. Some women even used birthing stools or leaned over specially prepared cushions to harness gravity. Interestingly, animal fats or mild oils were sometimes rubbed on the skin to ease the friction of movement, a practical, if slightly odd, technique. The blending of sensory cues, warmth, touch, smell, and sound created an immersive support system designed to help the laboring woman endure. In addition to physical methods, distraction was often employed. The midwife might hum or sing softly, neighbors could whisper encouraging words, and family members might offer herbal infusions to sip slowly. Stories of previous births, sometimes humorously exaggerated, provided comfort and perspective. Quirky practices also included placing a small mirror near the mother, believed in some regions to reflect away pain or evil spirits, a reminder that belief and superstition were inseparable from daily life. Pain relief in all its forms was never solely about comfort, it was a shared responsibility. The mother's endurance, the midwife's skill, and the family's attentiveness intertwined, forming a network of care that was physical, emotional, and spiritual. Even as contractions intensified, the combination of herbal remedies, ritual, tactile guidance, and communal presence created a rhythm, a flow that carried the mother through each wave. You observe the layering of centuries of knowledge and tradition, a delicate balance between science, superstition, and the human capacity for endurance. By the time the first true surge of labor peaks, you realize that pain, while intense, has been softened by preparation, ritual, and presence. The room hums with quiet determination, a symphony of human attention focused on life emerging. Each breath, touch, and whispered word is a testament to centuries of maternal experience, preserved and refined through trial, care, and communal memory. The methods may seem quaint or odd today, but they represent a profound understanding of the intersection between body, mind, and community. The moment arrives when all preparation, all anticipation, and all ritual converge, the delivery itself. You trudge closer to the bed, sensing a heightened rhythm in the room as contractions intensify, and the midwife positions the mother with practiced efficiency. Candles flicker across the walls, casting shadows that seem almost alive, stretching across rough beams and stone floors. You probably won't survive the intensity if you try to absorb every detail, but the atmosphere is oddly hypnotic, a blend of tension, focus, and quiet reverence. In medieval childbirth, the mother's positioning was crucial. She might kneel on the bed, lean over a sturdy chair, or lie partially reclined, supported by pillows or family members. Midwives often guided her movements, knowing instinctively when to encourage a shift, a push, or a pause. They employed tactile methods, pressing gently on the lower back or hips to ease passage, sometimes using linen cloths moistened with herbal infusions. Fringe remedies appeared here as well. In some regions, midwives rubbed raw garlic or crushed gemstones on the abdomen, believed to strengthen the child or quicken labor. Historians still argue whether any of these measures had a tangible impact or whether they primarily provided psychological reassurance. Tools were minimal but meaningful. Wooden birthing stools, simple knives for emergencies, and small hooks or scissors for cutting the cord were kept at the ready. You notice a shallow bowl nearby, filled with warm water for hygiene and ritual cleansing. Wealthier households sometimes included more elaborate instruments, while in villages ingenuity prevailed. Cloths, leather straps, and careful positioning substituted for expensive gear. Midwives balanced practical skill with resourcefulness, blending tactile precision and observation to navigate the unpredictable event. Ritual remained entwined with practice. Prayers were whispered over the mother, amulets adjusted, and incense or herb smoke encouraged a calming atmosphere. Some midwives instructed rhythmic chanting or breathing exercises, others told stories or offered gentle humor to distract from pain. Quirky gestures included the occasional small bell or mirror, intended to ward off evil spirits or guide the child into light. You notice the delicate choreography, each movement, touch, and utterance carefully calibrated to support both mother and midwife, merging tactile guidance, spiritual reassurance, and practical intervention. The moment of crowning is approached with intense focus. Family members may offer steady hands, soft words, or a comforting presence. Midwives guide the mother's efforts, timing pushes, and observing the subtle shifts of the baby's head. You feel the room's energy shift. Tension meets relief, concentration meets quiet elation as life prepares to emerge into the world. Even with centuries of accumulated knowledge, unpredictability remained. Complications could arise at any moment, requiring swift action, calm judgment, and unwavering attention. Despite the intensity, the delivery is a testament to skill, intuition, and communal effort. The midwife's hands, the family's vigilance, and the mother's endurance merge into a single, coordinated force, steering the fragile process of life safely forward. Odd and elaborate as some fringe methods may seem, the essence of medieval childbirth lies in this mixture: tactile skill, herbal knowledge, spiritual ritual, and communal presence. You can almost sense the pulse of centuries converging in the room, each moment a dance between human effort and nature's rhythm, preparing for the miraculous arrival that is both ordinary and extraordinary in the medieval world. The baby has arrived, and a hush settles over the room, punctuated by the mother's deep, shuddering breaths and the midwife's quiet assessments. You trudge closer, noticing the subtle shift in energy. Labor has ended, but a new phase begins: postpartum care. In medieval times, these first days after birth were as crucial as the delivery itself, with elaborate routines, confinement practices, and rituals designed to protect both mother and child. You probably won't survive the overwhelming attentiveness if you try to take it all in, but there's a gentle rhythm in the care, a careful orchestration of observation and reassurance. The mother is guided into a process known as lying in, a period of rest and isolation that could last anywhere from a week to a month, depending on wealth, local custom, or advice from the midwife. She remains in bed or a low resting area, surrounded by pillows and blankets, while the midwife attends to hygiene, nourishment, and monitoring for complications like fever or excessive bleeding. Warm compresses, sponged baths, and herbal infusions are routine, blending comfort with careful attention to medical concerns. Fringe practices might include the sprinkling of holy water on the mother's bedding, or tying protective charms around the infant, blending superstition and ritual into daily care. Historians still argue whether confinement primarily served health purposes or reinforced social and spiritual norms. Diet during this period was highly prescribed. Mothers were encouraged to consume soft, easily digestible foods, broths, porridges, and milk, sometimes fortified with eggs or aromatic herbs. Richer households might include light wines or rare spices, thought to strengthen the mother. Quirky additions occasionally appeared. Small amounts of saffron or crushed pearls were believed to boost lactation or enhance the child's vitality. Midwives monitored intake closely, balancing nourishment with caution to prevent digestive upset, reflecting a sophisticated awareness of maternal needs even without modern nutritional science. Infant care was equally meticulous. Swaddling was standard, with tight linen bindings intended to support limbs and prevent injury. Small amulets or tiny cloth charms were tucked into blankets to ward off evil spirits or ensure long life. Bathing, while infrequent, involved carefully warmed water and herbs to cleanse and soothe the newborn's delicate skin. Midwives observed the child's breathing, color, and responsiveness, alert to signs of weakness or illness. Community support played a role. Neighbors or female relatives might assist in feeding, soothing, or watching over the child during brief absences. Hygiene and superstition intertwined in curious ways. Mothers often bathed in herb-infused waters, while infants might be anointed with oils or lightly dusted with powders thought to strengthen the body. Some households placed small charms near the crib to protect against the evil eye, while others recited prayers at dawn and dusk to invoke divine favor. You notice how these rituals, blending sensory, spiritual, and practical elements, create an environment of safety and attentiveness, a buffer against the fragility of early life. The early postpartum period emphasized both protection and transition. Mothers were reminded to move carefully, avoid drafts, and allow the body to heal, while midwives continued monitoring for signs of infection, ensuring bleeding was controlled and guiding the mother through emotional fluctuations. Quirky practices like placing coins or small tokens under pillows to encourage healthy recovery persisted alongside strictly observed hygiene and dietary routines. The combination of rest, nourishment, observation, and ritual formed a tightly woven safety net, reflecting the medieval understanding that birth was not a single event but a process extending far beyond the moment of delivery. Through all of this, you sense a delicate balance between fear and hope, fragility and resilience. The mother rests, the baby swaddled and sleeping, while the midwife moves quietly, attentive to every breath, every flicker of skin color, every small sound. Even centuries ago, the essence of postpartum care was clear. Vigilance, comfort, and protective presence were as essential as any medicine or herb. You witness a world where the act of birth continues seamlessly into the careful orchestration of recovery and nurture, a living choreography of care that binds mother, child, midwife, and community together. The newborn's first cries echo softly through the room, a reminder of the delicate fragility of life in the medieval world. You trudge closer to observe the intricate routines surrounding infant health and survival, aware that even with careful care, mortality rates remained high. You probably won't survive the stark awareness of this vulnerability if you let yourself dwell on it, but understanding these practices illuminates the profound care that surrounded each new life. Infant health was a primary concern, and swaddling was central to protective strategies. Bobbies were wrapped tightly in linen or woolen bands, sometimes layered multiple times, ensuring limbs stayed straight and movements were controlled. The belief was that swaddling supported growth and prevented deformities, though it also served practical purposes, keeping infants warm in drafty stone houses. Midwives carefully adjusted swaddling to allow breathing and circulation, while keeping tiny hands and feet snug. Fringe variations included the insertion of protective charms within the swaddling cloth, a tiny cross, a small coin, or a stitch of colored thread meant to ward off evil spirits. Historians still argue whether these charms had any real psychological or protective effect, or if their role was largely symbolic. Nutrition played a pivotal role. Breastfeeding was the preferred method, and wet nurses were employed in wealthier families if the mother could not provide milk. Mothers and wet nurses followed specific dietary regimes to ensure adequate nourishment, often emphasizing cooked cereals, soft meats, and dairy. Oddly enough, some texts recommend small amounts of sweetened wine or spiced broth for lactation support. In addition, midwives occasionally administered herbal teas or poultices to stimulate milk production. You notice the delicate monitoring. Each feeding, each burp, each diaper cloth is a tiny measurement of the infant's health, a careful assessment practiced over generations. Disease and infection were constant threats. Bobbies were highly susceptible to illnesses ranging from gastrointestinal upset to fevers that modern medicine easily treats today. Midwives and families used herbal remedies, fumigation, and careful hygiene to mitigate these risks. Odd but widespread practices included sprinkling ash or powdered herbs near the crib, or reciting protective charms and prayers multiple times a day. Some households even placed the baby in proximity to certain animals, believing warmth and vitality could confer protection, though historians still debate whether this was beneficial or risky. Observation extended to temperament and early behavior. Midwives recorded responses to touch, crying patterns, and sleeping habits, sometimes making predictions about personality or health. Fringe practices included fortune tests using mirrors, coins, or small objects to divine the child's future, a blend of superstition, hope, and social ritual. The family collectively participated in this observation, sharing stories, offering comfort, and reinforcing social cohesion around the infant. You notice the quiet intensity. Each glance, each gentle touch, each whispered word is a thread in the web of care that sustained the fragile life. Swaddling, hygiene, feeding, and ritual created overlapping layers of protection. Parents, midwives, and extended family members maintained constant vigilance, not just to safeguard the child physically, but to embed them in the community's moral and spiritual fabric. Even minor illnesses were met with a combination of herbal remedies, prayer, and careful observation, reflecting a nuanced understanding of the interplay between environment, nourishment, and superstition. The room hums with attentive care, a blend of fear, hope, and love, as centuries of knowledge and ritual converge in the small body swaddled against the chill of the stone house. Through all of this, you witness the delicate dance of survival. Each feeding, each swaddle, each whispered prayer is a negotiation with life and death. Fragility dominates. But resilience emerges through communal vigilance, practical wisdom, and a touch of superstition. In the medieval mind, health was as much a product of attention, ritual, and social support as it was of herbs and care. You trudge through this space, absorbing the layered reality of infant survival, aware that every small gesture carries weight, and every tiny life is a testament to human ingenuity, hope, and endurance. The quiet intensity of the room begins to mingle with the broader social and religious world outside, and you trudge through the delicate balance between intimate birth and communal expectation. In medieval times, childbirth was never an entirely private affair. The event was steeped in community, faith, and tradition. You probably won't survive the sheer density of ritual and expectation if you try to catalog it all. But there's a gentle wonder in observing how social and spiritual frameworks intertwined with physical birth. Faith played a central role. Saints associated with childbirth like Saint Margaret or Saint Anne were invoked frequently. Families placed small statues, icons, or amulets around the birthing space, and prayers were whispered throughout labor and postpartum care. Midwives themselves often recited psalms or guided the mother in spiritual exercises to protect her and her child. Quirky practices included placing a tiny cross under the infant's swaddling or suspending blessed thread above the crib, merging tactile and symbolic protection. Historians still argue whether these rituals primarily served psychological reassurance or carried tangible benefits, but their ubiquity highlights the inseparability of spirituality from daily life. Community support was equally critical. Neighbors might drop by to offer assistance, share herbal remedies, or provide practical goods like fresh linens, pottages, or firewood. Extended family, grandmothers, aunts, and sisters participated in both labor and postpartum care, offering guidance, emotional support, and hands-on assistance. Even the men of the household often played subtle roles, ensuring food was prepared or managing the household, while women oversaw the delivery and early care. The line between personal, domestic, and communal responsibility was fluid, with every participant contributing to a shared sense of vigilance and protection. Rituals extended to marking the passage of life. The nomming of a child was often accompanied by blessings, prayers, or symbolic gestures, while milestones like the first bath, first swaddling, or first feeding were embedded with ceremonial significance. Fringe customs included invoking natural forces, such as moon phases, certain herbs, or zodiac symbols, to influence health and fortune. Some communities even conducted small public blessings, where neighbors gathered to offer goodwill and protection. You notice the layered attention, practical care interwoven with symbolic and social acts, a tapestry of participation that envelops both mother and infant. Superstitions also permeated daily routines. To ward off the evil eye or malevolent spirits, families might place iron objects in the cradle, hang red threads in the doorway, or recite incantations while washing the infant. These practices may seem peculiar today, yet in the medieval worldview, the spiritual environment was inseparable from physical survival. Even mundane tasks like heating water or preparing food were performed with protective intent, reflecting a holistic approach to well-being that merged body, spirit, and society. As you linger, you sense how childbirth functioned as a nexus of social, spiritual, and practical life. Every ritual, every blessing, every visitor was part of an intricate web designed to protect, nurture, and integrate new life into the community. The mother rests, the baby swaddled and calm, while the household remains vigilant yet rhythmically attuned to the needs of both. The experience is simultaneously intimate and communal, deeply personal and broadly social. A reminder that in the medieval era, life was never experienced in isolation. You trudge through this layered world, absorbing the complex interplay of belief, care, and community. The faint smell of herbs, the soft flicker of candlelight, the gentle whispers of prayers, and the rhythmic murmur of family presence form a cohesive atmosphere of protection and attentiveness. Every gesture, whether practical or symbolic, reinforces the shared responsibility for life, highlighting a worldview where childbirth was both a deeply personal event and a reflection of communal, spiritual, and social cohesion. The tale now winds its way into the rarefied corridors of royalty and nobility, where childbirth was both a private struggle and a public spectacle. You trudge through ornate chambers, the scent of wax, incense, and perfumed oils blending with the soft rustle of silk and the quiet murmur of attendants. You probably won't survive the contrast between commoner practice and aristocratic ritual if you try to absorb all the detail, but the sheer pageantry and sometimes absurdity reveals how social status shaped the birthing experience. In noble households, births were meticulously staged affairs. Midwives were often accompanied by a team of assistants, physicians, and occasionally clerics, all present to ensure success and document the proceedings. Beds were lavishly prepared with layers of silk, blankets, and cushions, while warm water, herbs, and aromatic oils were ready for immediate use. Fringe practices included placing precious gems under pillows or sprinkling powdered pearls and gold leaf in the birthing chamber, believed to bring good fortune and strength to both mother and child. Historians still argue whether such measures had any real medicinal effect or were entirely symbolic displays of wealth and concern. Medical attention sometimes included male physicians, though even they often deferred to experienced midwives during critical moments. In royal births, intricate monitoring of maternal health was combined with rituals designed to maintain social prestige. Guests, distant relatives, and courtiers were sometimes present, their roles a mixture of witness, support, and social observation. You notice the careful choreography, attendants ready with herbal poultices, midwives offering subtle guidance, and physicians prepared for complications, a high-stakes performance blending medical knowledge, superstition, and social duty. Diet, hygiene, and confinement were elevated to elaborate rituals. The mother consumed carefully selected broths, wines, and rare foods to maintain strength, while confinement extended for weeks under close supervision. Bobbies were swaddled in richly embroidered cloths, with tiny protective charms and gold threads incorporated into their wraps. Curiously, some royal infants were even exposed briefly to sunlight at particular hours, a practice believed to strengthen the constitution. The contrast with commoner practices is stark, yet the underlying principles rest, protection, nourishment, observation remain consistent, demonstrating that wealth amplified rather than replaced the medieval approach to childbirth. Not all noble births were serene. Complications, scandals, and unexpected deaths punctuated history, from premature labor to contested succession. Quirky customs sometimes veered into extreme territory. Predictive tests using mirrors, astrologers consulted for auspicious timing, or the insertion of symbolic objects to guide the child's future. The stakes were high. A successful birth could secure dynastic stability, while failure could spark political turmoil. You feel the tension in these chambers, where life, power, and superstition intersect in ways both fascinating and sobering. Yet even amidst grandeur, echoes of everyday practice remain. Midwives relied on herbal knowledge, positioning, and tactile guidance. Rituals and prayers were essential, as were family and attendants' vigilance. The experience, though amplified by wealth and status, still depended on human endurance, observation, and care. You notice the through-line connecting aristocracy and commoner alike. A birth is simultaneously physical, social, and spiritual, demanding coordination, patience, and intuition from all present. You trudge through these corridors of power and ritual, witnessing both the pageantry and the pragmatic skill that characterize noble births. From whispered prayers to precious poultices, the blend of practical care, superstition, and social expectation creates an environment intensely focused on survival and success. The mother rests, the infant swaddled, while attendants remain watchful, a living testament to how childbirth could shape both life and legacy. Even centuries later, these stories remind us of the universality of birth, where every detail, lavish or simple, serves the enduring purpose of life emerging safely into the world. The centuries slowly unwind behind you as you trudge through the final threads of medieval childbirth, and you begin to see the enduring legacies these practices left on later medicine, culture, and our collective imagination. You probably won't survive the sheer persistence of tradition if you attempt to track every detail, but there's a quiet fascination in observing how centuries of care, ritual, and trial and error shaped both the myths and methods that followed. Medical knowledge evolved slowly, often building on the foundation laid by midwives, herbalists, and physicians of the Middle Ages. Techniques for positioning during labor, herbal remedies for pain or stimulation, and attentive postpartum care informed early modern obstetrics. Even the quirks, swaddling, charms, prayers, hinted at the importance of psychological reassurance in survival, a principle still acknowledged today. Historians still argue whether some of the more fringe methods like gemstone poultices or astrological timing had any measurable effect, but their symbolic and comforting roles are undeniable. Cultural myths about childbirth also persisted, fueled by medieval imagination. Tales of miraculous births, protective amulets, and saintly interventions became part of folklore, coloring later beliefs about maternal and infant vulnerability. Some rituals survive surprisingly intact. Swaddling, confinement, careful postpartum diets, and the presence of a trusted caregiver all endured in various forms. Even the widespread notion of laboring positions finds its roots in practices developed long before modern hospitals, a subtle callback to the ingenuity and observation of centuries past. Religious and social frameworks influenced subsequent practices as well. The emphasis on community, prayer, and protective rituals reinforced the notion that childbirth was a shared responsibility, a principle that echoes in contemporary maternal care models emphasizing family involvement and emotional support. Quirky medieval customs, charms, incantations, and small symbolic gestures illustrate the interplay between human psychology and ritual, a concept modern medicine increasingly recognizes in its holistic approaches. Yet despite all progress, the medieval experience reminds us of the fragility, courage, and resilience inherent in birth. Every mother, midwife, and infant participated in a delicate choreography of endurance, observation, and hope. You trudge through this history and sense a continuum, care, skill, and ritual evolving over centuries but rooted in timeless human instinct. Oddities and superstitions pepper the narrative, but the underlying themes, vigilance, preparation, and communal support, resonate across time. You feel the lingering warmth of candlelight, the faint aroma of herbs, the attentive hush of a household devoted to life emerging. The tapestry of medieval childbirth weaves together practical knowledge, social responsibility, spiritual belief, and a touch of whimsy, creating a legacy that informs both history and imagination. These stories remind us that while medicine, society, and technology change, the fundamental experience, the intertwining of pain, hope, skill, and care remains remarkably constant. Your first steps along the platform reveal the curious duality of the Victorian seaside. On one side, there's a polished world of well-dressed ladies in puffed skirts and gentlemen adjusting top hats with self-conscious precision. On the other, coal-stained laborers and merchants huddle around food stalls, steam rising from frying fish and chips, making your nose twitch and stomach rumble simultaneously. There's an energy, a subtle tension, as though the sea itself is holding its breath, waiting for the sun to dip low enough to reveal both beauty and grit. As you trudge through the sand, the sensation is immediate. Fine grains slip between your toes, sticking stubbornly even through thick boots, reminding you that the seaside, for all its curated elegance, doesn't care for your comfort. You glance toward the horizon, where rolling waves crash lazily yet insistently, reflecting sunlight in fractured diamonds. Historians still argue whether the early Victorian fascination with the beach was driven more by a desire for leisure or by the therapeutic reputation of seawater. But standing there, you feel it either way. Salt in your hair, the bracing chill of the sea breeze on your cheeks, and an unspoken invitation to belong and yet remain slightly out of place. Even the sounds are a contrast. The gulls scream like auctioneers above, while the hum of the boardwalk carries a mechanical rhythm from distant calliopes and spinning rides, teasing you with fleeting glimpses of candy-striped tents and amusements that promise delight for a penny. Then there's the smell, pungent blend of coal, fried seafood, horse manure from carriage horses, and the crisp, salty bite of the ocean. You inhale deeply, trying to savor it, but also dodging the occasional rogue splash from the surf. In the distance, you notice clusters of families forming small microcosms of society. Ladies carefully shade their pale skin with parasols, gentlemen discuss commerce and politics in low, measured tones, and children unabashedly run and scream, dragging along hoops and kites in the sand. It's a spectacle of contrasts, the disciplined, highly codified behaviors of the upper classes colliding with the playful chaos of children and working families. There's even a fringe element, a group of amateur sand sculptors, working with such intense seriousness it almost borders on performance art. You can't help but smirk, imagining someone 150 years from now writing a scholarly article debating whether these contests were truly recreational or some form of proto-performance obsession. Your eyes are drawn to the bathing machines, those awkward rolling wooden boxes perched at the water's edge like stage props from a forgotten play. Ladies and gentlemen will soon step inside to descend modestly into the waves, avoiding the scandalous exposure that the Victorian moral code demanded. You shuffle closer, curious and cautious, brushing past horse-drawn carriages lumbering along the sand. The smell of tarred wood from the machines mixes oddly with seaweed and the faint sweetness of toffee being sold at a nearby stand. You notice something odd. A man in a bowler hat standing beside a small cart, selling tiny, oddly shaped shells claim to bring good luck and love, despite the fact that most passers-by just raise an eyebrow. Fringe practices like these were common, and while mainstream culture favored order and etiquette, curious oddities crept in, hinting at a society both structured and delightfully whimsical. Historians still argue whether such superstitions were widespread or just the amusements of coastal eccentrics, but seeing him, you feel the mix of skepticism and hope the era thrived on. By now, the sun has climbed higher, casting glittering specks across the wet sand. You step closer to the water, toes sinking into the cool, foamy edge, and realize how everything here, the sounds, the smells, the dress, the rules, and the tiny rebellions, is a careful dance between pleasure and propriety. You pause, letting a wave lap at your boots and take in the scene. A world meticulously ordered yet teeming with life, eccentricity, and unpredictable moments that make you wonder what it truly meant to visit a Victorian seaside. As the day begins, you feel a peculiar tension between anticipation and discomfort. You're eager to explore further, to step into bathing machines, try seafood delicacies, and witness the boardwalk entertainments, but also aware that you will be constantly navigating the fine line between propriety and indulgence, between spectacle and reality. And somehow, that very tension is intoxicating. You inhale the sea air once more, bracing yourself for the day ahead, knowing that every step on the sand will etch an unforgettable memory into your mind, even if it leaves your boots gritty and your hair tangling with salt. You trudge along the sun-warmed promenade, feeling the weight of layers upon layers of fabric pressing into your shoulders, and immediately notice that Victorian seaside fashion is less about comfort and more about spectacle. Ladies' skirts balloon outward on hoops so wide you almost bump into a parasol-wielding matron with every step. Gentlemen adjust waistcoats, top hats, and walking sticks, trying to appear effortlessly refined despite the sand seeping into every fold of clothing. You probably won't survive a day here without awkwardly shifting, adjusting, or apologizing for stepping on hems, yet somehow the ritual is enchanting. So before you get fully tangled in laces and sand, let's pause a moment, take a mental snapshot of the chaos. Bright stripes, pastel ribbons, and the occasional scandalous splash of rouge paint the scene. Corsets constrict torsos to near inhuman degrees, making even the simplest walk along the boardwalk a test of endurance. Historians still argue whether these fashions were intended purely to display social rank, or if there was a subtler, almost performative element, like a secret code saying, "I can endure this discomfort, therefore I am genteel." As you dodge a group of children chasing hoops, your eyes drift to a lady balancing a sun hat so wide it could double as a small sail. You wonder how anyone could survive a brisk sea breeze without it toppling into the sand. Fringe fashion experiments abound. You notice a man in bright green tights paired with a velvet frock coat, clearly meant to shock or amuse. Some historians suggest these eccentricities were a way for the middle class to claim distinction, while others argue it was pure whimsy, an assertion you silently endorse as the man nearly trips over a stray crab claw. Bathing costumes add another layer of complexity. Ladies' bathing dresses, thick with flounces and ankle-length skirts, are designed to preserve modesty while turning every dip in the water into a struggle against fabric, water, and gravity. Gentlemen sport similarly elaborate suits with full sleeves and knickerbockers that trap sand like a tiny, wearable sandbox. You wonder how anyone could swim without looking like a very soggy marionette, and historians still argue whether these costumes were truly practical or just a theatrical compromise between prudence and leisure. And then there are accessories. Oh, the accessories. Gloves, parasols, small hand fans, and jewelry carefully layered to suggest both taste and propriety. You notice a child tugging on a mother's lace sleeve, trying to point out a small, gaudy trinket that seems almost alive with color. Fringe culture seeps in even here. Some inventors marketed hats with hidden compartments for snacks or waterproof pouches for seashells, combining necessity with eccentricity. You shuffle past a vendor selling hats so wide they might double as umbrellas, each adorned with ribbons, feathers, and artificial flowers. Some are practical, some purely decorative, and a few are downright absurd, one hat shaped like a miniature ship, complete with a tiny mast and painted sails. You can't help but imagine how it would fare in a gusty sea breeze, toppling over like a coconut from a palm tree. The crowd reacts with polite amusement, yet some wearers treat their hats with reverence, adjusting ribbons and smoothing fabric as if protecting a fragile jewel. Shoes are equally treacherous. You slip once on damp sand while trying to balance long skirts and polished boots, catching yourself just before a full faceplant. The scent of leather mingles with sea salt and you notice a tiny fringe detail. Some beachgoers have sewn miniature bells into their shoes so each step jingles with its own rhythm, a playful rebellion against the strictures of Victorian etiquette. Historians still argue whether such adornments were widely accepted or quietly frowned upon, but watching the jingle of each footstep, you can't help but smile at the ingenuity. The heat of the sun contrasts sharply with the heavy clothing. You begin to understand why some bathers collapse into deck chairs after a short stroll. Fans flutter rhythmically, parasols shift in the breeze, and the occasional gentleman wipes his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief. Amid this orchestrated chaos, you notice the subtle social choreography. Families keep close, lovers steal glances, and strangers nod politely without making contact. It's a carefully curated dance of propriety and display, performed against the backdrop of crashing waves and seagull cries. Even the children participate in this spectacle. Boys in knickerbockers and straw hats chase hoops, girls balance small parasols while skipping along the sand, and everyone seems acutely aware of the eyes of society, yet determined to bend the rules just enough to enjoy themselves. Some fringe games emerge, miniature fashion contests judged by a self-appointed panel of onlookers, complete with whispered critiques on ribbon placement or corset tightness. You can't help but marvel at the inventiveness, wondering how much of this is spontaneous and how much rehearsed for social approval. As the morning stretches on, you realize the fashion of the Victorian seaside is a spectacle of contrasts. Elegance and absurdity, discomfort and display, strict etiquette and playful rebellion. You pause, adjusting your own coat and hat, feeling the weight of layers but also a curious exhilaration. The beach isn't merely sand and sea. It's a stage where every stitch, ribbon, and parasol contributes to a complex performance of identity, class, and whimsy. And as you step carefully past a particularly daring feathered hat that seems to defy gravity, you can't help but chuckle at the sheer creativity and occasional absurdity of it all. You trudge toward the water and there it is. The line of bathing machines, like a row of strange wooden caravans, each one promising privacy, modesty, and a brief, socially sanctioned dip in the waves. Stepping closer, you feel the planks creak underfoot and the salty breeze whips at your face, tugging at ribbons, hats, and the hems of skirts. You probably won't survive this without a minor tumble or an embarrassing stumble, but that's the charm of the Victorian seaside, formality and chaos in equal measure. So before you step inside one of these curious contraptions, remember to take a moment to appreciate the ingenuity. Bathing machines were essentially rolling changing rooms on wheels, allowing bathers, primarily women, to enter the sea without being seen by prying eyes. You peek inside one, noticing the small bench, hooks for towels, and the faint smell of damp wood and tar. Historians still argue whether the invention truly promoted modesty or simply created a theatrical illusion of privacy while adding a sense of ritual and spectacle to what should have been a simple swim. You step carefully into the machine, your toes slipping slightly on wet boards, and feel the first thrill of anticipation as it begins to roll toward the water, pushed by muscular men in shirt sleeves. The rhythmic creak of wheels over sand and the faint scent of seaweed mingle with the occasional laugh or squeal from another bathing machine nearby. Fringe uses of these machines exist, too. Some inventive minds retrofitted them with small benches for picnics, tiny telescopes for viewing passing ships, or even hidden compartments for seashell collections. It's almost as if the machine itself became a personal stage, a microcosm of seaside eccentricity. The descent into the water is both anticlimactic and dramatic. You lift a hem, carefully lower yourself into the foamy edge, and feel the cold bite of the sea instantly waking your senses. Gentle waves lap at the wooden sides of the machine, and you notice the subtle choreography of others doing the same, hands clutching rails, skirts flaring, hats poised precariously, all while trying to maintain a semblance of composure. You glance around and catch the faint, lingering debate. Some swimmers appear liberated and joyful, while others seem weighed down by the layers of fabric and expectation. Historians still argue whether this elaborate process enhanced the bathing experience or imposed unnecessary stress on participants. From inside the machine, you notice an almost theatrical ritual among the bathers. Women lower parasols just so, dip a foot gingerly into the water, then retreat to adjust a skirt or curl a ribbon. Gentlemen, if present, often oversee proceedings or take careful steps to avoid scandal, sometimes waving politely to friends while maintaining a rigid posture. The scene looks both absurd and charming, like a silent play performed by a cast of meticulously costumed actors. You can't help but smirk at the contrast between the serene waves and the frantic human choreography happening on their edges. Fringe elements are everywhere. A group of young men has rigged a small pulley system to let baskets of towels float between the shore and the machines, effectively creating a miniature cable transport for sun-dampened linens. Another bather quietly experiments with early waterproof fabric, testing a suit designed to keep sand and water out entirely. These odd innovations, while marginal, hint at the inventiveness that ran parallel to Victorian propriety. Historians still argue whether these minor inventions influenced mainstream bathing culture or remained niche curiosities, but seeing them, you can't help but admire the ingenuity. The scent of salt water mixes with wood polish, horsehair from carriage cushions, and the faint hint of baked goods wafting from nearby stalls. You dip further, feeling the resistance of the waves, and notice how even the simplest act of swimming has been transformed into a performance, an intersection of modesty, spectacle, and personal triumph. Some bathers smile and laugh as water drips from hems, others maintain solemn expressions, determined not to betray any discomfort. You notice one woman secretly dipping her fingers into a small pocket of water, testing its temperature like a scientist in a lab, while a child peers curiously from the edge, fascinated and unbothered by etiquette. As the sun climbs, shadows from the machines stretch long over the sand, casting angular, geometric patterns that almost resemble a chessboard. You step out carefully, dripping and awkwardly balancing, feeling the contrast between wet fabric and the warming sun on your shoulders. The public's gaze, though polite, adds tension. Every movement, every shuffle is part of an unspoken social code. Some spectators even carry small viewing cards, noting movements, times, or the precise unfolding of bathing rituals. Fringe behavior, you notice, includes subtle competitions: who can enter and exit the water most gracefully, or who can keep skirts least damp. By the time you retreat fully from the machine, you feel a sense of accomplishment mingled with exhaustion. Your clothes cling, your hair tangles with salt, and you've participated in a strange, beautiful, socially codified performance that is uniquely Victorian. You glance back at the other machines, each rolling quietly along the wet sand, and realize that while the scene may seem absurd from the outside, it represents a careful balance of practicality, propriety, and spectacle. Every creak of wood, every hesitant step into the waves, every small innovation or oddity you observed contributes to the intricate, almost theatrical experience that defined Victorian seaside bathing. It's a combination of modesty, ingenuity, and eccentricity that leaves a lasting impression, both amusing and slightly bewildering on anyone brave enough to step inside. You trudge away from the machines, dripping, sand-smeared, and smiling, ready to explore the amusements and boardwalks awaiting beyond the surf. You trudge away from the rolling bathing machines, feeling waterlogged and slightly disoriented, and find yourself on the wooden promenade, the heart of Victorian seaside amusements. The sun warms the planks beneath your boots, and the smells hit you in layers: fried dough, roasted chestnuts, brine, and the faint tang of coal smoke from nearby engines. You probably won't survive the sensory onslaught without tripping over at least one uneven board, yet the allure of the boardwalk pulls you forward. So before you get swept up in the bustling crowd, take a moment to absorb it. Wooden railings lined with brass, candy-striped tents advertising magic shows and fortune-tellers, and the distant wheeze of a calliope that seems to pipe directly into your brain, demanding attention. Historians still argue whether Victorian boardwalks were primarily spaces of leisure, or if they were subtle tools of social control, structuring who could see what and whom. Standing here, you sense both: the structured chaos of commerce and amusement, curated for moral propriety yet designed to delight. The amusements themselves are a mix of the familiar and the downright bizarre. You see children eagerly tossing pennies into mechanical strength testers, while adults peer into crystal balls promising glimpses of love, fortune, or impending mischief. Fringe entertainment abounds. Performers dressed as mermaids wade in shallow pools, while a man balances atop a wooden horse on a rotating platform, spinning and bowing with ridiculous precision. You pause to watch, captivated by the absurdity and ingenuity, wondering which of these attractions were considered frivolous and which were taken seriously by polite society. You drift past a candy stall, inhaling sugar, caramel, and a hint of coconut. The vendor gestures with theatrical flair, offering licorice sticks and sugared almonds, while nearby a small crowd watches a puppeteer animate tiny marionettes with exaggerated, almost grotesque motions. Some historians suggest these puppet shows were merely entertainment for children, yet others argue they were subtle social commentary, poking fun at the rigid hierarchies and rules of the day. You can't help but smile at a marionette nodding solemnly, as if judging the crowd with tiny wooden gravitas. Games of chance are everywhere. You pass a ring toss, a shooting gallery, and a small wheel of fortune. Patrons concentrate, tossing rings with meticulous care, aiming for brass bottles or painted targets. Fringe innovations appear here too. One booth features a guess-your-weight machine with gears and springs creaking ominously as it tries to calculate your mass, drawing laughter from onlookers and occasional groans from those who fail the test. Historians still argue whether these amusements were primarily social equalizers or a clever way to separate the wealthy from their pennies. Watching people, you lean toward a mix of both. Street performers weave through the crowd. A juggler spins flaming torches, balancing precariously on stilts, while a small dog in a waistcoat scampers alongside, executing tricks trained with meticulous patience. The scent of oil lamps mixes with frying donuts, creating a strangely comforting olfactory palette. You notice a fringe performer whispering riddles to passers-by, earning smiles and occasional puzzled frowns. It's these small, eccentric touches that make the promenade feel alive, beyond its structured pathways and staged entertainments. As you walk further, you come across the penny theaters, small stages where dramatic reenactments of historical events, romantic melodramas, or whimsical farces play for the price of a coin. The actors exaggerate gestures, and the audience reacts with gasps, laughter, or applause at carefully rehearsed moments. Some historians argue these penny theaters were more educational than entertainment, a form of moral instruction dressed in spectacle, while others insist they were pure escapism. You watch a scene unfold where a pirate dramatically rescues a maiden, and it's impossible not to get caught up in the ridiculous grandeur. Food and drink mingle seamlessly with spectacle. Vendors hawk clotted cream tarts, pickled herrings, and even early sodas in glass bottles that fizz when opened. You notice a fringe concoction, a colorful jelly meant to mimic sea creatures, sold as both snack and novelty. Patrons eagerly try it, some giggling, others grimacing. Historians still argue whether such culinary oddities were true indulgences or playful experiments appealing to curiosity rather than taste. You quietly grab a gingerbread figure, its sweet scent mixing with sea air, feeling part of the carnival-like scene without fully surrendering to it. The sounds around you form a symphony of the seaside. Calliopes wheeze, children laugh, waves crash faintly in the background, and vendors shout with practiced enthusiasm. You notice the rhythm, a blend of planned entertainment and spontaneous delight, structured yet unpredictable. Fringe behaviors, like a group of men tossing hoops at distant poles or a woman sketching caricatures of passers-by, give the promenade an almost anarchic undercurrent, suggesting that even within strict Victorian decorum, imagination and whimsy flourished. Finally, you pause to watch the ebb and flow of visitors. Families, lovers, and solitary wanderers weave around each other, negotiating space, etiquette, and amusement alike. The boardwalk, though meticulously designed, thrives on the unexpected. A dropped coin, a toppling hat, the sudden giggle of a child at a ridiculous puppet. You realize the seaside, at its heart, is a living theater, where social norms, personal pleasure, and eccentricity dance together in a carefully choreographed yet delightfully unpredictable performance. You take a deep breath, the mix of salt, sugar, and timber filling your senses, and prepare to explore the culinary surprises waiting just beyond the promenade. You trudge away from the lively boardwalk, stomach growling and senses tingling, toward the clatter and aroma of seaside food stalls. The smell hits immediately. Fried fish sizzling in vats of oil, sweet dough frying into golden perfection, and the faint, peculiar tang of pickled eels cooling in shallow wooden barrels. You probably won't survive this culinary gauntlet without at least one minor cringe, but the experience is irresistible. So before you pick up your first morsel, take a mental note of the sheer variety. Vendors peddle fried soles, jellied eels, cockles, and even early versions of ice cream. Historians still argue whether fried eels were genuinely a delicacy or simply a necessity born of affordable coastal abundance, but your first taste, slimy yet oddly savory, leaves a lingering curiosity. You lean closer, balancing on one booted foot as the seller ladles generous portions onto a newspaper sheet, wrapped quickly and handed to you like a prized treasure. The first bite is a mixture of sensation. The crisp exterior gives way to tender flesh, a touch of sea salt mingling with the faint tang of vinegar. Nearby, children nudge each other while attempting to eat sticky toffee without dribbling onto their pinafores, and a small crowd gathers around a man offering fried dough spirals dusted with sugar, each shaped into spiraling loops almost hypnotically perfect. Fringe culinary experiments appear too. A confectioner markets a jelly molded into tiny crabs and seahorses, shimmering under the sun, and some diners hesitate before biting into these playful novelties, unsure whether it's dessert or decoration. You notice a subtle ritual in food consumption. Families and friends share portions, often wrapped in newspaper or tin trays, while the upper classes opt for porcelain dishes at nearby tea tents, carefully consuming fried delicacies with napkins and polite conversation. The contrast is stark. Streetside simplicity meets genteel ceremony, a microcosm of Victorian social hierarchies played out over greasy fish and sugary treats. Historians still argue whether these culinary spaces reinforced class divisions or allowed a rare mingling across boundaries, but standing here with sand sticking to your boots, you feel both worlds simultaneously. Pickled eels are especially divisive. You tentatively bite into a glistening slice and the briny, gelatinous texture surprises you. A group of older gentlemen nearby observes with amused detachment, reminiscing about proper seaside fare, while children wrinkle their noses and gag slightly at the smell. Fringe preparation methods exist as well. Some vendors simmer eels with herbs, others claim secret sauces that enhance vitality. You swallow carefully, marveling at the combination of practicality, taste, and showmanship involved in every dish. Fried soles are gentler on the palate, crisping golden in vats of bubbling oil. You watch as a nearby family carefully separates bones with small forks, the children attempting to imitate their parents' precision. A sweet seller passes by with candied almonds, coating sticky fingers and drawing delighted laughter from onlookers. The mingling scents, the tactile pleasure of handling wrapped treats, and the visual feast of golden fried delicacies create a multisensory symphony that makes the beach feel alive beyond sun and surf. A fringe delicacy you notice draws particular curiosity. Small cups of stewed cockles, seasoned lightly with vinegar and herbs. Some diners dip in with cautious fingers, others with tiny spoons, debating the appeal of the chewy morsels. Historians still argue whether these dishes were a widespread favorite or merely coastal eccentricities, but observing reactions, joy, hesitation, disgust, delight, you see how tastes and social expectations collide. You try a spoonful, finding it surprisingly palatable, the brine of the sea captured in miniature. Ice cream is a novelty in some of the larger tents, churned slowly in hand-cranked machines. The sun warms your fingers as you balance a small cone, watching a child drop theirs almost immediately. Flavors are simple: vanilla, raspberry, and early chocolate, but their rarity makes them prized indulgences. You notice a fringe technique. One vendor adds a faint dusting of sea salt to the cream, claiming it enhances flavor. The effect is subtle yet memorable, and a small crowd gathers to watch patrons taste and react. Nearby, you spot a tent selling penny lemonades in tin cups. The liquid fizzes faintly, sweet and tart, a welcome counterpoint to fried foods. You sip carefully, watching the sun glint off the surface and noticing how every flavor, every aroma is amplified by the salty air and the rhythmic crash of waves. Children chase seagulls while adults sip politely, and you feel a peculiar, almost euphoric sense of connection to this moment, to a sensory world curated centuries ago yet vivid as if you'd always belonged. By mid-afternoon, your hands sticky, boots sandy, and hat slightly askew, you realize the seaside culinary experience is more than mere sustenance. It is a ritual, a performance, a dialogue between practical nourishment, playful indulgence, and social commentary. You savor the last bites of fried fish, watching the crowd ebb and flow like the tide itself, and prepare to move toward quieter spaces where children play, and innocence meets eccentric tradition. The smell of the sea and frying oil lingers, a sensory bookmark to a meal that was, at once, strange, delightful, and unmistakably Victorian. You trudge past the food stalls, stomach full and senses tingling from sugar and salt, toward the spaces where Victorian children have claimed their own domain, the sand and the shoreline. You probably won't survive this without being accidentally tripped by a runaway hoop or stepping on a small rake used for sandcastle competitions, but that's the charm of observing seaside play. It's chaotic, earnest, and oddly competitive. So before you immerse yourself in their world, notice the attire: pinafores, knickerbockers, straw hats, and tiny boots, all mudded and damp, perfectly suited for rigorous seaside exploration. Historians still argue whether children's games were entirely recreational or subtly designed to instill discipline, social order, and gender roles, yet watching them, it seems the rules are less rigid here, allowing creativity and mischief to flourish. You crouch slightly, peering at a sandcastle contest. Teams of children wielding wooden spades dig, pat, and sculpt with astonishing focus. Some structures resemble miniature fortresses, complete with moats and flags made from ribbon and sticks. Fringe rules emerge. A particularly inventive group insists that seaweed garlands are mandatory for royal approval, while judges, often older children, nod gravely, evaluating both design and adherence to whimsical guidelines. You chuckle, imagining historians debating centuries later whether these contests fostered architectural talent or simply social performance. Nearby, children chase hoops along the wet sand, laughter echoing against the surf. The wooden hoops wobble and bounce unpredictably, requiring dexterity and patience. Boys and girls compete side by side, occasionally colliding, sometimes shouting rules and often inventing new games on the spot. Fringe variations abound. Some hoops are painted in elaborate patterns, others reinforced with metal, and a few daring children attempt to roll multiple hoops at once. You quietly marvel at the ingenuity, wondering if modern play could match such creative chaos. Kites fly overhead, tethered by string-wielding children with knuckles white from gripping tightly. Some soar gracefully while others crash spectacularly into sand or low-hanging parasols, eliciting gasps and laughter. Fringe designs appear, dragons, birds, and tiny ships, each decorated meticulously. Sometimes with painted faces that peer down at the beach like tiny sentinels. You notice a particularly elaborate kite tethered to a small pulley system, allowing the child to tug and maneuver it with near-military precision, a feat of engineering that would make any modern hobbyist nod appreciatively. The smell of damp sand mixes with faint hints of fried dough from distant stalls, creating an almost intoxicating coastal perfume. Children dig trenches and collect shells, while a few daring souls venture close to the foam, squealing as the cold water laps at their ankles. Historians still argue whether these activities contributed meaningfully to child development or were mere distractions. Yet observing their joy, ingenuity, and occasional strategic alliances, you can't help but see the formative power of play. Some fringe seaside pastimes verge on ritual. A group of girls carefully arranges shells in concentric circles, claiming it will bring good luck or summon fairies, while a boy stands guard with a wooden sword, dramatically protecting the sacred pattern from intruding siblings. These playful superstitions add layers of meaning, blending creativity with the cultural imagination of the era. You quietly wonder if these small acts of magic helped children navigate a world otherwise filled with rigid rules and expectations. You notice families watching with pride or gentle concern. Mothers clutch parasols, shading children from the sun, while fathers offer occasional guidance, or more often join in discreetly, letting the children take center stage. There's a subtle choreography here. Adults hover, intervene minimally, and allow the creative chaos to flourish. The balance between oversight and freedom feels deliberate, a reflection of broader societal tensions between control and spontaneity. Occasionally, disputes erupt, usually over territory or whose castle is tallest. Judgments are made with surprising solemnity. A small boy with a sand-smeared face acts as referee, consulting both the tide and parental opinion before declaring winners. Fringe practices persist. Some children use small contraptions to funnel water into moats or construct pulley-operated drawbridges, an almost mechanical approach to sandbox architecture that borders on engineering. Historians still argue whether such inventions were common or exceptional, but witnessing them, you feel the playful ingenuity of young minds unrestrained by the rigid etiquette surrounding adult leisure. By late afternoon, the sun casts long shadows, and children begin to tire, leaving behind a landscape of intricate sand sculptures, scattered toys, and footprints that trace chaotic, joyful paths. You pause, toes sinking into damp sand, and realize that these small, inventive, often eccentric pastimes encapsulate the essence of Victorian seaside play. Structured yet spontaneous, imaginative yet social, disciplined yet delightfully unpredictable. The laughter, strategies, and creative flourishes linger in your mind like a soft echo, a reminder that even in an era of strict rules, the human spirit found ways to bend, innovate, and delight. You trudge away from the sandcastles and kite strings, letting the salty breeze dry the damp sheen of your skin, and notice the strange intersection of Victorian health, hygiene, and seaside eccentricity. You probably won't survive this without raising an eyebrow or three at the elaborate and sometimes bizarre rituals designed to improve well-being, but that's precisely what makes the seaside so fascinating. So before you step closer, take a moment to observe the patterns. Handbaths set up on small wooden stands, buckets of seawater for splashing, and large tubs filled with warm water mixed with herbs, algae, or mineral salts. Historians still argue whether these treatments genuinely promoted health or were largely symbolic gestures designed to reinforce social status, yet watching the participants, their seriousness is undeniable. You notice a woman lying on a plank, her body partially covered in seaweed wraps. Attendants carefully drape kelp around her limbs, muttering softly about vitality and circulation. Fringe treatments abound. A man nearby rubs a concoction of crushed seashells and oils onto his hands, claiming it prevents fatigue and promotes longevity, while a child giggles at the strange smell, recoiling slightly. Some argue these treatments were rooted in early scientific thinking. Others suggest they were elaborate theatrics to impress curious onlookers. Handbaths are a common sight. Small basins, often filled with seawater and sometimes sprinkled with crushed lavender or mint, allow ladies and gentlemen to refresh themselves without leaving the promenade. You dip your fingers cautiously into one, feeling the sharp contrast between cold liquid and sun-warmed skin. Fringe innovations include small mechanical devices that allow bathers to move their hands up and down without bending, a clever if slightly unnecessary contraption, reflecting both inventiveness and obsession with hygiene. Historians still argue whether these devices had any lasting influence on personal care trends, but their presence adds texture to the seaside's eccentric tableau. Sun exposure is another domain of curiosity and contradiction. Some Victorian guides recommend short bursts of sunlight for health, while others advocate near-complete shading to avoid the dangerous burn of improper tanning. You notice groups lounging under umbrellas or lightweight pavilions, hats tipped dramatically, faces powdered and shielded. Fringe practices appear. A woman applies a thin layer of crushed pearl to her face, claiming luminous skin. A gentleman positions mirrors to direct sunlight onto his arms while avoiding direct contact with the rest of his body. Historians still argue whether these methods actually conferred any benefit or were largely aesthetic experiments masquerading as science. Seaweed wraps, handbaths, sun rituals, none exist in isolation. Vendors sell mineral oils, herbal tonics, and early medicinal lotions promising relief from fatigue, cramps, or minor ailments. You see a small crowd gathered around a man offering a miracle elixir of seawater, honey, and crushed sea urchins. Fringe claims of efficacy abound, ranging from heightened energy to improved digestion. You tentatively sip a sample, wincing at the flavor but marveling at the dedication of both seller and audience to this ritualistic form of seaside wellness. Massage and manipulation techniques are also on display. An attendant rubs a gentleman's shoulders with scented oils, claiming to stimulate circulation, while nearby a child mimics the motion on a small sibling, giggling at the feel of slippery lotion. Fringe elements are present here too. Some practitioners employ small wooden rollers designed to mimic the waves of the sea, asserting that the rhythm of water can harmonize the body. Historians still argue whether these devices achieved any genuine physiological benefit or were largely performative, yet the belief in their efficacy adds to the richness of the seaside's cultural tapestry. Hygiene extends to footwear and attire as well. Bathers periodically rinse boots in shallow seawater pools, and skirts are subtly flicked to remove sand before re-entering promenades. Fringe tools include small brushes attached to boards, designed to clean boots efficiently while maintaining decorum. You pause to watch a lady carefully scrape her hem, her expression simultaneously focused and amused, reflecting the complex interplay between practical cleanliness and social performance. Even children participate in these wellness rituals. You notice small dippers of seawater used to splash faces, sand gently rubbed into hands to remove debris, and minor exercises directed by attentive adults. These practices, both playful and instructive, suggest an early understanding of hygiene and body care, albeit heavily framed by Victorian sensibilities. Historians still argue whether such routines instilled lifelong habits or were merely socialized mimicry of adult behavior, but the effect on atmosphere is undeniable. The seaside hums with ritualized care, eccentricity, and earnest dedication. By late afternoon, as shadows lengthen and the sun dips toward the horizon, the promenade feels simultaneously alive and contemplative. You pause, taking in the spectacle of handbaths, seaweed wraps, sun mirrors, and oil massages, realizing that these peculiar customs, practical, whimsical, and sometimes absurd, reflect a society negotiating pleasure, propriety, and health in a uniquely performative setting. The seaside, with its smells, textures, and rituals, is both indulgent and instructive, a microcosm of Victorian ingenuity, obsession, and fascination with well-being. You trudge along the sun-bleached promenade as evening descends, and suddenly the seaside transforms. Lanterns flicker to life, casting long, wavering shadows across the wooden boards. The smell of salt intensifies, mingling with faint traces of fried dough and seaweed, while the distant crash of waves punctuates the soft hum of conversation. You probably won't survive this sensory shift without feeling a little disoriented, but that's the allure of a Victorian night by the sea. So before you wander too far, take a moment to notice the subtle choreography of nightfall. Street lamps glow like tiny beacons, drawing families, couples, and solitary wanderers into softly lit corridors of activity. Historians still argue whether the seaside at night was primarily for social display or personal reflection. Yet as you step carefully along the boards, it's clear both purposes coexist effortlessly. Music emerges from hidden corners. A small calliope wheezes cheerfully, its tinny notes competing with the strum of a lute from a nearby performer. Fringe entertainers abound. A man in a sequin coat juggles torches while balancing on a barrel, and a woman with a shawl wrapped intricately around her head whispers ghost stories to a rapt group of children. The mixture of light, sound, and movement gives the promenade an almost surreal, dreamlike quality, where ordinary streets feel like stages for fleeting spectacles. The penny theaters, now illuminated by flickering gas lamps, attract a steady crowd. Inside, actors perform exaggerated melodramas, while outside, children clutch the hem of their parents' skirts to peer through windows. Some performances are serious reenactments of history, others farcical parodies that elicit laughter, gasps, or polite applause. Fringe shows emerge too: shadow puppetry, ventriloquism, or magic tricks that seem to defy both logic and gravity. Historians still argue whether penny theaters reinforced moral lessons or simply allowed adults to indulge in playful escapism. But tonight, their presence creates a kaleidoscope of culture, humor, and intrigue. The smell of the evening air adds layers of enchantment. Toasted nuts, sugar, and hints of spiced wine mingle with sea salt. Vendors offer late-night snacks: gingerbread, candied almonds, and small pots of stewed shellfish for the more adventurous palate. Fringe delicacies abound: tiny cups of jelly shaped like sea creatures shimmer under lantern light, enticing curious tasters with both novelty and taste. You cautiously sample one, delighting in its unusual texture and faint sweetness, reflecting on the strange joys of seaside dining that defy conventional expectation. Couples begin to stroll more deliberately under the lanterns. Gentlemen adjust hats and coats, ladies tilt parasols to catch the glow. Whispered conversations, subtle glances, and the occasional playful nudge create a delicate social ballet. Fringe behavior is apparent. A group of teenagers sets up a small secret club behind a low fence, exchanging handmade notes and quietly giggling at the audacity of their rebellion. Historians still argue whether such interactions were widespread or exceptional, but observing them reminds you that even in rigid social structures, human creativity and curiosity find a way to flourish. Street performers continue to dominate small pockets of the promenade. A juggler tosses tin balls high into the evening air, catching each with practiced precision, while a dog in a tiny waistcoat executes tricks that draw laughter from onlookers. Fringe spectacles include fortune-tellers using rudimentary shadow illusions to predict fortunes, earning curious glances and sometimes coins from a mix of intrigued and skeptical audience members. The blend of structured performance and playful improvisation defines the energy of the night. Lantern-lit boats bob gently in the surf. Their reflections shimmer across the water, creating a soft, rippling tapestry of gold and silver. Children lean over low fences to peer, while adults admire the quiet beauty of reflected lantern light, a moment of calm amidst the bustling promenade. Some fringe enthusiasts have rigged small fireworks to arc from the shore, eliciting gasps and delighted squeals, adding transient sparks to the evening tableau. Historians still argue whether these spectacles were considered essential parts of seaside culture or minor eccentric amusements, yet the effect is undeniably magical. As night deepens, the promenade becomes a living mosaic of light, sound, and movement. You notice recurring patterns: the careful packing of families, the confident strides of couples, and the wandering curiosity of solitary visitors. Fringe behaviors, secret clubs, impromptu performances, daring culinary experiments add unpredictability and delight. The seaside, once a place of sun-soaked leisure, has transformed into a complex social theater, balancing propriety, amusement, and eccentricity with the subtle hum of waves as an ever-present backdrop. Finally, you pause at the edge of the boards, feeling the cool evening air and listening to distant music. The glow of lanterns warms your eyes, the faint crash of waves soothes your ears. The seaside at night is quieter yet alive, an interplay of spectacle and reflection, tradition and whimsy. You inhale deeply, the smell of salt, fried treats, and lantern smoke mingling, and realize that the evening has revealed a dimension of Victorian seaside life that is intimate, performative, and strangely enchanting.